Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. If I look at my younger self and a lot of the endeavours I picked up that I didn't finish, one of the big reasons for not going through with things is I had this idea in my head of how things should be. And when things did not pan out that way, I would lose interest and disengage, because it was always better to not do something than to do something badly or that's not up to scratch. And it has become a very, very clear reality that this is not the approach that I want to be taking in my life, because it simply does not yield fruit. It does not bear fruit, and that is not something that is worth doing. So today I really want to get into the topic of shipping the imperfect. And this isn't universally applicable, of course, with everything. There's always going to be a subset of things where you can't apply kind of this broad generalized advice. But if I've learned anything from my time as a software engineer, it's that it is very easy to do something imperfectly and then go and fix it. And software is a very fortunate area because generally the cost of doing something is relatively low. For example, if you're a civil engineer, you can't really afford to have a bridge design that's a bit crap and go and fix it, because that costs a significant amount of money. But something I've taken from software, which I really didn't have with what I was trying to do before, was the fact that we can make these mistakes and we can very readily correct them. In fact, a few weeks ago, I released a podcast episode and I got a message from a listener. And it basically said, the first 30 seconds of your podcast, there's no sound. Your intro doesn't exist. And the reason this happened is because I use a package called Audacity to edit these podcasts. And if I have a track on mute, which I will do, then that audio won't come up until I unmute it. So I had my intro and outro unmuted. Therefore, the first 30 seconds of the podcast and the last 30 seconds had no audio whatsoever. But as soon as they told me, within about 5 minutes, I was able to open up that file, unmute my intro and my outro, export the MP3 and re-upload that podcast, or re-upload, the audio for that podcast. And it was such a simple fix. And I think the big thing we need to keep track of is that in the modern world we're living in, and chances are a lot of you aren't in professions, or what you're trying to achieve is not tied to a profession where your first attempt needs to be at a particular standard. And so the exceptions obviously are, if you're a doctor and you're doing surgery, or you're a civil engineer and you're building multi-million-dollar physical infrastructure, then it makes a lot of sense to measure twice, cut once. But with a lot of other pursuits, you don't necessarily need to apply this advice. Now, I think measuring twice, cutting once is great advice. Definitely recommend doing that. But what I mean is, if you find yourself holding back on releasing something, it could be a creative pursuit like a podcast or a YouTube video or an artwork you're doing, then you're probably better off just getting it out there, even if it's not perfect, because whatever you think the negative implications of having something imperfect out there, it is a far better outcome than you never doing anything to begin with. And I think one of the stories that I've always heard, I think it was actually maybe a study, but they had 2 art classes, and in one art class, the teacher told the students, I want you to spend the whole term just trying to produce the highest quality piece of art you can. And he told the other students that I don't want you to worry about quality, I just want you to go for a volume-based approach, produce as many artworks as you can. And at the end of the term, the art teacher evaluated what both classes had done, and they found that the quality of the work in the group that focused more on quantity was far better. And this is something that I've slowly realized. And I too have made that transition, or I'm starting to make that transition, in the sense that my education was very much in the physical in the realm of physical manufacturing, it was you're designing a plant, a multi-million-dollar plant, you can't afford to have a very costly mistake. All of a sudden, I've moved into a field where you don't own any physical infrastructure yourself. It is very easy to change code and fix some of your mistakes. Now, again, there are exceptions to this. If you're a software engineer working at Boeing or NASA or in the medical field, of course, you're going to be measuring more than twice before you cut. But outside of those domains, and there are exceptions to everything, I think we as individuals should get into the use of shipping as quickly as we can. And if I look at this podcast, the very first episode I released, from when I started kind of getting the infrastructure ready for the podcast to releasing it, probably took me 3 months, because there was a lot of procrastination involved. Whereas now I will get an episode out in such a small amount of time because the work is done. And even then, just like I explained before, I've become much more comfortable with imperfection. Because my goal isn't to have every podcast be better than the next. I know that over time, my 200th episode will be significantly better than my 100th. Now, it won't be a linear journey, but I will learn different skills and learn different techniques. And the only way to improve my craft is to simply ship the imperfect. It is to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And it's been very easy to do with a podcast, where I'm trying to challenge myself and take that idea of shipping imperfection next is actually in my software engineering career. So if you've listened to some of my previous episodes, you will know that I have just recently quit my job. And a part of me quitting my job is to undertake a few experiments, both within my profession in software engineering and outside of that. But within software engineering, I need to get into the habit of shipping. And when I was working in a company, and one of the kind of ways we do enterprise software is we will seek everyone's opinion on how something works. Peer review, super important, very valuable skills. But sometimes the process of getting a change across could take some time. And I now need to develop the confidence that rather than waiting for something to be as close to perfection as it can be, it's to ship something that is good enough. And this is something I think I definitely appreciated about the senior engineers I work with. And I realized that's what separated me from when I began to looking at what some of the senior engineers were doing, in that I would try to do everything too perfectly. I would try to over abstract a problem to something that we weren't facing with right now. Whereas they would look at the same problem that I was looking at and they would say more practically, we can just do this solution here, and we can come back and we can resolve that later, but that's a separate problem. And I think for me, I definitely struggled to kind of see the problems the same way they did it. They had a very pragmatic approach, which allowed them to meet the business need. Because when you think about what is the purpose of something like code, at the end of the day, it is not about creating something that is inherently perfect and clean code. And there's all these philosophies, which I'll be honest, I actually love them. I love reading these technical software engineering books. But the real purpose of code is to deliver some business value. And sometimes my problem, if I reflect back on the way that I was attempting problems at work, is I would try to make an abstraction for a problem that we as a company, we as a team might not have necessarily been facing yet. And I think a lot of the software engineers I worked with, the reason that they were seniors is because they were more pragmatic about what we needed to do. And as a result, they could ship code faster. And I'm going into a chapter where I've given myself 9 months to do these experiments. And a big part of that is that I cannot hold myself back with this perfectionist mindset. I need to get products and services out into the public. And that's very important. And I need to realize it doesn't need to be perfect. It's okay if, I release software and it looks like it came out of 1995. As long as it does what it needs to do. It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to have the fanciest user interface. It just needs to do what it says on the packet. And that is going to be a very big kind of mentality shift for me, because it's everything I've been just talking about for the last 10 minutes and taking that even further. So I definitely think I have a lot of room for improvement. And what I really want to do is I really want to embody the whole concept of shipping the imperfect, because I realize that is the only way that I am going to hone my craft and get even better at what I do, and hopefully add value to people who might want to use my products. So I'm going to end it there. And the prompt to everyone listening to this is, where in your life are you holding yourself back because you want to do something so perfectly that you're stopping yourself? And is there really an easy way for you to get something imperfect out? Now, of course, as I said, if you're working for Boeing, if you're working for Airbus, if you're working for NASA, if you're in the medical industry, definitely measure many times before you cut. But I think that for a lot of you listening to this, in your pursuits, there is a very high probability that you can ship something today, tomorrow, and it's going to be okay if it's imperfect, because you're not going to perfect it in the first iteration. You might perfect it in the 1000th iteration. And the only way for you to do that is to keep pushing imperfect things out. So I will end this there, and I wish all of you listening to this great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.